Hey everyone, I'm Milton McClelland,
And I'm Libby Lee.
and we're here to start the newscast.
Yeah.
All right, this is one of the last interpersonal effectiveness skills, and this is about as drastic of two separate skills as we go over, and they're two separate ones. We kind of teach them together though, because I think that the main tie-in is about self-awareness.
Absolutely.
And the thing that really bridges between these two skills is, am I aware of what's going on with me and others? And kind of like the fast skill, am I being honest about it?
Yeah.
So that's that's the bridge. It's not going to make a lot of sense until you see the two skills. So we're talking about mindfulness of others, which is handout 12, and we're talking about ending relationships. It gives definitions for what that means. So we'll go into that in a second. So Libby's going to start us off with.
No, you are.
I'm going to start us off with the observe skill. So this is a skill that is really, in other words, every time we do observe, we're trying to look at it through the lens of what's the purpose, what we're trying to observe. Because we can say observe everything, but let's be honest, that's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. So in this case, the target that we're trying to observe is, how do I interact with others? And how do I interact with myself in a way that creates space that others want to be in? And so when it's looking at this on handout 12, I love the thing it says at the very top: friendships last longer when we are mindful. That's an interesting statement. And it's a
true statement.
It's very true. If I'm not aware of myself and how I interact, and I'm just meeting my needs, I'm not going to have friends very long. No one wants to hang around that. All right, so this is really like taking the give skill, and if you struggle with the give skill, this is kind of a good way to look at how to do the give skill.
Absolutely.
So the things that it talks about in observing, I'm laughing because I see the ones that I'm already struggling with. Pay attention with interest and curiosity to others around you. I can do that for about 5 seconds, and then my ADD brain kicks off and other things. When I'm genuinely interested in a topic, it's a lot easier, obviously. But this is when we're talking about the give skill, we're acting interested in the other person. We may not be interested in what they're talking about, but because we care about them, we're spending time with them. Absolutely. Stop multitasking, focusing on the people you're with. Welcome to the modern world, where multitasking is, I'm sitting with the most distracting device on my lap, using it in a way to teach you guys. I promise, you're it. You're number one right now. This is all for you. And Libby's number 2. So it's hard. Let's just own that. It's hard.
Yeah.
And couples try to do this, or friends try to do this, like while they're watching TV or while they're, texting another person. It's not helpful. It doesn't bring strength to the relationship. Stay in the present rather than what you're planning to say next. That's kind of manage your anxiety a little bit. In other words, what these skills, and you can kind of go through the rest of them yourself as well. And I should highlight letting go of focusing on self and focusing on others around you.
Which for me, when I'm thinking of what I'm going to say next, it's usually when I'm in a debate or an argument with someone. And
sure.
I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to prove that
I'm going to try to be right.
Yeah, and I'm not listening to their side of it. We're not having a discussion, and I'm just saying, oh no, I'm right because of this.
I'm listening to respond as opposed to take in.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's the piece that matters is if a relationship matters. Hey, yeah. Look what we just did. We listened to take in and to strengthen the relationship. Just the other night, in fact, I was sitting with a group of friends, and I like knowing things, and I like sharing what I know with other people. So that's one of my weaknesses, is I get excited about sharing information, and I try to cram that information into other people's heads. And I kept correcting people when they said things just a little bit wrong. That's not focusing on them, that's focusing on me. And no, you got to understand that I know this perfectly. And when you're that guy or gal or whatever, then it's hard.
Yeah, that damages your relationships, because nobody wants to be around or be friends with someone who's constantly telling them, oh no, I know better than you, and I need you to know that I know better than you.
So luckily my friend corrected me, and I heard it, and he was very frustrated, and I got to apologize to him. It was good. So that was, and it goes in the other ones. So being honest to new information, no judgments, and notice the judgments as they come. In other words, you got to be willing to own your stuff. So this is like the best amalgamation of the give and fast skill in the observe piece. Now Libby's going to go into where the deer man comes into play.
Absolutely. So next up, if we're being mindful of these relationships, we want to describe. And this is actually going to cover a lot more than what we just typically think of as describing. It, first of all, means avoiding the judgment that we always get to when we go into our emotional minds and we assume that all of our feelings are facts. You're going to avoid judgmental words and replace those with descriptive words. So instead of saying you suck, say like I feel like what you're saying is directed at me and it makes me feel anxious. Or I don't like that feeling.
Or the sideways describing your idea sucks. That's not terribly
that
descriptive.
Also. Yeah.
So yes, I didn't attack the person, but I just basically said your opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And then along with describing, we're going to describe in our own heads as well. We're not going to sit there even quietly in our own minds and assume things about other people. We're not going to assume people's motives or their intentions. We are going to say, this is what I know about the situation. These are the facts. This is what I can observe through my senses. I'm not going to go crazy and say, oh, he's cheating on me because he just didn't make eye contact when he said I love you. Because it's just, we're putting ourselves in a situation and setting ourselves up for failure if we're constantly assuming about other people.
Well, and that's why the describe and dear man is just the facts. And that's the piece that we're looking at. So when we're describing these things back about relationships or friendships or whatever, because this is every interaction from the teller at the check stand, that's going to last all of 5 seconds to 5 minutes, to the deepest relationships we have.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's all about checking the facts. It's all about looking at what we can observe. And it says here, remember, no one has ever observed another person's thoughts, motives, intentions, feelings, emotions, desires, or experiences.
So can we highlight no one's ever observed other people's feelings? We guess, and
sometimes we're really good at guessing because we have experience and we may know the person really well, or we may have felt that feeling a lot and we can recognize, but you can never know exactly what's going on. And so assuming, once again, is just setting yourself up for failure. So on that note, we want to avoid questioning other people's motives unless you really have a very good reason to do so. If it's about your safety or the safety of someone else you love, then err on the side of caution, of course. But if you are constantly questioning the motives of your friends and you're not building up those relationships and allowing that trust and mutual appreciation to form, then those aren't relationships worth having anyway.
Yeah.
And then lastly, give people the benefit of the doubt. You always want to assume, once again, that people are doing their best with the skills they have.
I don't want to, but it would really serve you well if you did.
I mean, I want to.
I want to try to. I want to be careful with instilling rules.
True.
We have enough rules.
This isn't ideal, of course, to be able to say,
if we can do
everyone's doing their best. If we can do that.
So I said during the fast skill, we're filming this at the height of the coronavirus scare. Right now, I've had to use that skill over and over again, that I want to assume that everyone is doing the best they can. And it's not an easy thing when we've got lots of anxiety around us.
And no toilet paper.
So all of those things matter when we're trying to maintain relationships. So.
Yeah.
All right, last but not least, how to participate effectively. And I love that really what this is mindfulness of others is just, here's how you use the mindfulness skills in relationships.
Absolutely.
It's so great. All right, throw yourself into interactions with others. Okay. For those of us who are more impulsive minded, this is learning a balance, because sometimes you can overthrow yourself into things. The part of participation that matters is learning how to read the situation and then go kind of with the flow. And that doesn't mean that it's not appropriate to change the flow sometimes, and drive the flow in a different direction, because you get to have fun too. But you don't want to be the rock that gets thrown into the creek that just splashes everywhere. Creek.
Creek or creek?
I'm from Utah. I say creek.
I say creek also.
Okay.
Is it
But
crick
now
or
I don't
creek?
know
Tell
what
us
I
in the
say.
comments. Just kidding.
Yeah. Now I don't, well, because they're going to spell it. That's not going to work. I say crick, don't I? I do say crick.
You say crick?
I think so.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, so see us participating fully with each other. There you go. We don't want to be the rock that's thrown into the river or the stream.
The babbling brook.
Because that just gets everything wet, and ultimately the flow is going to go back to where it goes. But if we can divert the stream to, you know, what works for us too, then that's okay. And you know, you can do that by easily inserting yourself into conversations with other people, and then you can kind of bring up some topics that you want to talk about. And that's it's not taking over. It's, you know, going with the flow and learning how to participate effectively.
So it's kind of those two opposite sides of, on the one hand, you never participate and you're just kind of like sitting at the rock on the bank. That's kind of observing that stream, but not participating, not getting wet whatsoever. And we have lots of clients that come in like that are just very scared to have interpersonal relationships because they have been hurt in the past. And it's safer to just not participate at all, but that's not a life worth living. We humans need other humans.
Yeah.
And then there's the opposite side where you jump all in and try to control those relationships. And so lots of the time, this is about.
And then you realize that your rock is not bigger than the stream.
Yeah, absolutely. And so lots of what participating is being vulnerable and being willing to have those relationships. And some people take vulnerability and kind of twist it, and they think that by telling everyone their whole life story and like getting really down to the deep and dark very fast is being vulnerable, when in reality you're trying to take control of that relationship and mold it into something instead of letting it naturally grow into the relationship that it's going to be.
Yeah, and I me's that's kind of the key to participation is if you can figure out how to, this is the easy manner and give skill.
Yes.
You know, it's being able to get a laugh so that you can easily join into the conversation. It's the inserting yourself into a conversation effectively.
Practicing.
Yeah, it takes time. And if you're, excuse me, if you're socially, I'm going to sneeze. Maybe.
Bless you.
Oh, there it was. There you go. That's the appropriate sneeze technique. I'm mindful.
Don't catch the virus.
I'm mindfulness of Libya in the room by participating effectively in my sneeze technique. So that's the mindfulness of others. How do we use our mindfulness skills to first observe the situation, then describe to ourselves and others what's going on, and then easily flowing into what's going on in the situation.
Yeah.
It's a great skill.
Yeah.
I'm not always masterful at it.
So now we want to go into what happens when relationships are not exactly what we want and expect them to be.
Do you want me to screen share? We can throw up the two definitions. I think those are important.
This interpersonal effectiveness handout 13, ending relationships, is all of boing.
Zoom.
Boing.
There we go.
It's all about mother. What happens when you're using your describe, observe, and participate skills and they're not working? What do you do when the relationship is still not what you want or expect, or even like to the extreme of feeling like you're in danger? So we want to look at the difference between a destructive relationship and an interfering relationship. Now, a destructive relationship has the quality of destroying or completely spoiling either the quality of the relationship or aspects of yourself, such as your physical body and safety, your self-esteem or sense of integrity, your happiness or peace of mind, or your caring for the other person. So destructive relationships are kind of that super extreme end. You want to look out for your own emotional, physical, mental well-being and that of the other person.
And if you're not able to do that, then that's a pretty good indicator that you're in a destructive relationship.
Absolutely.
If I'm constantly invalidating myself, if I'm constantly being hurt, if I'm, or infrequently, but it happens consistently enough.
Yeah.
If I've had to ask my partner multiple times, stop that, you're hurting me, then I'm potentially in a destructive relationship.
Yeah. Whereas like if your partner says something once that is super invalidating and it hurts your feelings really badly, then we're going to talk about this in the future, but that's probably not something that you want to immediately end the relationship over.
Yeah. I mean, this is, and there again, it goes back to the boundaries. If I've got a wide open boundary, that makes it really easy for destructive people to come into.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
we have to be aware of that.
So on the opposite side of that, we have the interfering relationship, which is one that blocks or makes difficult your pursuing goals that are important to you, your ability to enjoy life and do things you like doing, or your relationships with other persons, or the welfare of others that you love. So this is still a relationship you really need to be aware of.
Well, this is sometimes, I think, the harder one to tell that it's destructive.
Absolutely. So destructive relationships, I feel like we can always recognize in other people.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes we can't recognize them in ourselves, but largely our wise mind can identify.
Well, and especially if there's physical evidence.
Exactly.
If I'm staring in the mirror and there's a bruise on my face, there's physical evidence that I get to look at every time.
Yeah. Whereas interfering relationships that just get in the way of your values and make it really hard for you to pursue your goals and have relationships with other people, or your ability to, have that life worth living, that gets a lot harder to identify, and it's way murkier. And so both of these are really important to be aware of, but one of them is way harder than the other. So,
well, especially because, it's so subtle. The control generally doesn't happen overnight.
Yes.
It happens slowly, and then at some point it gets extreme and very black and white.
Yeah.
But then you feel trapped. And
kind of like we talked about before when we were talking about the fast skill, it's kind of the difference between sometimes these relationships are with people who are really manipulative, who are doing these things on purpose to hurt us.
They're intentional.
And then a lot of the times the interfering relationships, and sometimes destructive relationships as well, but the interfering relationships often occur with individuals who are not doing it intentionally, but nevertheless are causing us gradual emotional or mental harm.
Yeah.
So the very first step to ending relationships
I'm going to click off the screen share real quick.
Yeah, sounds perfect. The very first step to ending destructive relationships and interfering relationships is that you you'd benefit greatly. It would really be beneficial.
If it's life or death, then it's a should.
Yeah.
And so there again, we can't be black and white on the should rule either, right? There are
you can never say should.
Never. There are times where should be implemented because
it's too early.
I get it.
Yeah, but it's really important to look at whether or not you are in a wise mind space before you end a relationship, because obviously this is a more clear example, but if you are in the middle of an argument with someone and you are just done, absolutely done with them, and you tell them that in that moment, then you're in your emotional mind. And sometimes we have thoughts that seem like wise mind that are like, oh, I need to do it now so that I remember how abusive this person is or how much this person makes me angry, when really having that wise mind perspective, you're going to be able to, if you are mindful, you're going to be able to draw on those emotional memories as well as the logical side, and then listen to like that innate knowledge within you to be able to make the best choice for the relationship. So it's extremely beneficial to decide to end relationships in wise mind, not in your emotion mind. And not in the logic mind either, because that's not taking into account your personal feelings.
Well, no, because you can logic yourself in or out of everything.
Absolutely.
You can do the same thing in your emotional mind.
Yeah.
You can use facts to back up your actions, or you can use feelings. When you're in your wise mind, you can actually see for reality for what it is.
Yeah. So like, it's kind of like those relationships where all of your friends are like, oh my gosh, he's terrible, don't date him, he's the worst. And you're like, oh yeah, you're right, he is the worst. And then when you're with him, you're like, oh my gosh, but daddy, I love him. And it's just that really strong feeling, and you're totally in emotion mind when you're with him, and then you're completely in logic mind when you're with your friends. And you've got to kind of reconcile both of those things and see the good and the bad. You've got to look at the pros and cons.
And I think we like to focus on when relationships are intimate and romantic, and how we see
I do like to focus on
I get that. The reality is this can happen in friendships as much, and it can happen in families.
Absolutely.
And that's where it gets super complicated. If it's a physically dangerous relationship in families and or friendships, it makes it harder. I mean, the complications that come with all of this are extremely hard. So back in the 80s and 90s, late 80s, early 90s, there was a show on TV called Cops. And, everyone would always say when the police would roll up to the domestic violence disputes, and even the police officers would say, I don't get why they're together. The reality is when you're in that relationship, when that's your world, you don't know how to get out of those things. And that happens
Absolutely.
in friendships, that happens in families. And we go into this in the interpersonal effectiveness myths that there are, you should never put, anything over family. That's a huge family myth that lots of people live by. So this applies in every aspect of relationships. All right, the next step. If the relationship is important and not destructive, and there's reason to hope that it can be improved, try problem solving to repair the difficult relationship. In the most intimate, marriages or relationships, long-term relationships, there are things that happen that seem like they could end everything, affairs and those kind of things, and even multiple affairs. And if there's hope in the relationship, you can work through those things. You have to be honest first.
Mm-hmm.
Is this actually a hopeful relationship? Is this not actually destructive?
Yeah.
Is this person just having a problem and working through a really hard time themselves? Are they responding to trauma triggers?
And this is where checking the facts gets really important. What do I factually know right now? What are the actual possibilities? Am I catastrophizing and saying, oh, it's never going to get better, and and protecting myself by ending the relationship? Or am I going to the other side and just like building up in my mind, oh, but it could get so much better and it will be fine, and ignoring all of the stuff that's going on and deciding to keep the relationship? You've got to have that honest conversation with yourself of whether or not this relationship is beneficial anymore, whether or not it's worth pursuing.
And there are things that can be recovered from. Even the worst of things can be recovered from at times. I mean, there are couples who, they lose a child and that ends them. And then there are couples that brings them closer together. So there's not a right way or a wrong way to look at this one. It's just the idea that there's not a hard and fast rule just because someone has done something. It's more about looking at the totality of the relationship. I mean, if I looked at my family and I said, well, because they've done this, this, and this, the reality is every family's done lots of things. And I haven't given up on them. Now, I may have more solid boundaries with some of them than I have with others, but ultimately, I haven't given up on my family.
Yeah.
I am hopeful that people will change, and if they change, I'm willing to give them another chance. And that is the case, in 20 years of marriage, we've had times where both of us have screwed up, and we kept the hope that, things were going to get better and continue to improve. And they generally, 99% of the days they do, and, still those 1% of days where they don't.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But there's enough hope in the, there's enough hope in the relationship that I can work past the things that I need to work past.
Absolutely. And I think that one thing that we haven't quite touched on that gets in the way of deciding to continue moving forward, and that just is like, nope, this relationship's over as soon as something happens, is when we have those more rigid boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important to look at, are my boundaries healthy? Am I letting opportunities in? Are my boundaries
am I open
loose?
To being hurt so that I can learn the things I need to learn?
Absolutely.
That's sometimes.
Am I open to having relationships that could potentially hurt me in order to create my life worth living, or am I shutting myself out to that possibility?
Yeah.
Totally. The third thingy on this list.
Third step? I don't know.
Step.
Third box.
It is a box. It's
a rectangle.
Yeah, it's a long rectangle. The third long rectangle on this page is to cope ahead, to troubleshoot, and practice ending the relationship ahead of time.
Without the person that you're ending.
Without
don't practice with the person you're trying to end the relationship with.
That is emotionally abusive.
Yes.
It's terrible. It's like, I'm breaking up with you. Oh, no, just kidding. Wait, but I was just practicing. Let me practice a couple more times. Okay, now I'm really breaking up.
Yes.
Anyway, but I have talked to people before, and I think I've been the person before that thinks, oh, if I plan this out ahead of time, then it's not legitimate. It's not coming from my heart.
Mm-hmm.
It's not how I'm.
It's got to be spontaneous.
It's got to be spontaneous. But lots of the time,
this is what happens when your major is theater.
Used to be. And so, it's important to note that lots of the time, especially in these relationships where our values aren't as well established, or where the person may or may not be manipulative of our emotions, you can plan out what you're going to say in your head, and you can say, oh, it's going to be spontaneous, but it's going to be great. and you go to end the relationship, and lots of the time you are going to kind of step back from your values and apologize and say, nope, sorry, it's fine, I'm not going to do this, or like end up not breaking off the relationship at all. The other person may convince you to stay or something. So this step of using the cope ahead skill, imagining, okay, what is this going to look like? How am I going to say this? Actually rehearsing what you're going to do.
The man portion of Dear Man. Right?
Yeah.
This is the coping ahead for the attacks that could come. This is planning how you're going to respond, how you're going to stay on message, and then acting confident, even if you're not.
Yeah, acting confident.
Acting confident.
And sometimes part of this coping ahead skill is looking at where is there immediate physical danger in a relationship? Do I need to bring someone else with me? Do I need to get authorities involved? Do I need to just write a letter and not be there in person? Really looking at the circumstances of the relationship, how ending the relationship could turn out, and taking every possible precaution.
Yeah. All right. The next one, practice opposite action for love. So this is an emotional regulation skill. And when we get to these extreme behaviors, sometimes we need to incorporate those emotional regulation skills to actually fix the problem. This one's tough because we're not telling you to not love the person you're ending the relationship with. We're telling you to act opposite to love.
Yeah.
And that goes through the, if you need to hate them, then that's fine. But you can be just focusing on the things that you are dangerous about the relationship. You don't have to convince yourself you love them. We can accept that that's the case. And then you're going to then do all the opposite things that you would need to do. It's not easy.
It's not.
It's more of a time thing than anything that will heal you from loving a dangerous relationship. And even though your body and or your mind is telling you to run to this person, you have to look at that, be mindful, and then be honest with yourself, and then choose to turn around and walk away.
Yeah. This is what's going to help you regulate those emotions and kind of get them back under control. This is what protects you from what your wise mind knows is happening in this relationship and isn't healthy.
And so the last box is there's the National Domestic Violence Hotline that is published on this. There's lots of local centers. We have here in our city, our local center that is both support for men and women. This is not a one sex or one gender thing. This is across the board. And it happens in same gender attracted relationships too. So the reality is and families too. There are times where we need help and we need intervention, and sometimes we need outside help and intervention. And if you got to an understanding of what a destructive relationship is, or what a interfering relationship is, I was going to say a limiting relationship, what an interfering relationship is, and you figured out that your relationship is that, more likely you are going to need some help. Reach out, ask for help. Obviously, if we can help and if we can find the resources in your local community, then we're happy to do that.
Absolutely.
And so those are all things that are always available to you. These two extremes, this mindfulness of others and this ending destructive relationships. Like I said, it's the bridge is that self-awareness. If I'm aware of myself and how I interact with others, then I'm going to keep relationships longer. If I'm aware of myself and the relationship and I'm honest when it's a destructive one, I'm going to be willing to end it. That is honestly, it's the key to relationships. And so the first relationship you really got to have is the one with yourself. And that's kind of why when I look at all these skills in interpersonal effectiveness, I'm really looking at how I do this with myself, because frankly, I need to end a destructive relationship with myself if I'm critical of myself all the time. I need to end the interfering or limiting relationship with myself if I'm constantly telling myself I can't do that. There's a reason that the self-help world makes billions of dollars every year. It's because enough people have a bad relationship with themselves that they have not figured out how to end that. So this applies on many levels. Any other closing thoughts, Libby? Okay, this is a tough one. It's a drastic dialectic, and both really great skills. So if you need any help with them or understanding, obviously leave a comment or question in the section. And of course, let's have a rousing discussion about these things. And if you're struggling with any of the definitions we're using, we're okay with that. Pushback is fine with us. So thanks. We'll see you in the next video.